So I just want to start off with just the basic question. So how much is this worth? And you've seen, the people who are not from Canada, you've seen this funny money, right? It's pretty colors, it's kind of transparent. Especially for those of you from other countries, how much is this worth? This is a $20 note. In Mexico?
In Mexico, like 13 pesos is like $1.
All right. And now you're multiplying, and dirhams is some other factor, yeah. You probably convert it to American dollars, right? Because in Mexico, you rarely think in Canadian dollars. So most people, that's what they do with this. They say, the value of this is the monetary value. So $20 in Canadian is roughly 15 in US, 250 in pesos, Mexican pesos, 50 dirhams. So that's what you would be able to buy in a shop. You could also say this is worth 23 cents because that's the actual production cost of one of these things. It's actually a little more than most. Like you take an average American note, which is pretty much paper. This is some polymer weird thing that is impossible to counterfeit, all that kind of thing. And if you actually take into consideration how much it costs to get it to the bank and then in circulation, it's a few more. So 38 cents Canadian, some might say that is how much this is worth. So that's almost the entirety of $20 that's different. You can also say 10 of whatever I'm buying, 10 of my favorite chocolate bars, or about one Uber ride in this town from here to downtown. It's about $20. All of these answers are true. So that's the preamble. It's what we're going to do today. So the reason why Chris asked me to do this session, I'm presuming, is because you have a presentation to some people in London, people in suits and stuff, old people. They're likely going to ask you some questions about financial aspects and economics. And more than likely, that's not something you lose sleep over. You probably want to think about actual solving the people problems and dealing with the environment and infrastructure. That's what you want to do. But most people, especially in positions like the people you're going to meet, think about that stuff, but likely they think about the money part more. And you will really impress them if you can offer some insight into the money part. And that's what we're going to talk about as part one today. If we get through that quick enough, we can get to the non-boring stuff, because that's the boring stuff, and I'm going to try to make it as interesting as possible. The non-boring stuff is what I teach in my graduate course. So the first part is I'm going to try to give you my entire third year engineering economics course from McMaster in less than 1 hour. The second hour is going to be the stuff I really enjoy teaching about, and that's my graduate course. And if you can bear with me for a couple of hours, we may be done. But if you really are offended by it, you can leave. The bonus part about this, I'm trying to do this not so much because I believe that engineering economics is so important and you need to know this stuff. No, I want to make you a bit more reflective and thoughtful by the end of it. And hopefully we get there. All right, who am I? This is me now, that's me then. 1988. 1988. I was valedictorian with that hair. Yeah. 1982, I arrived here. I grew up in Toronto. I was born in Korea. In 1971, we moved here. My parents were one of the very first families to own a convenience store from the Korean culture. Now you know every convenience store is owned by a Korean family here. I don't know what it's like in Mexico. I think Mexico actually has a good-sized Korean community. I don't remember seeing a lot of Korean families in UAE, but they may be there. Yeah, a lot of them work there. But here, many families own these small convenience stores, and that's important later on. All right, what have I done with my life? So today I'm a retired engineering professor at McMaster. That was only about 3 years ago when I joined. I actually work for a whole bunch of companies doing startup stuff and bizarre technology stuff. If you've ever used the software system Maple, that's the math software where you can do algebra and calculus on a computer, and that was invented here at this university, and I was one of the first employees. Certicom was a cryptography company. We were trying to develop algorithms for e-commerce, and now crypto means a very different thing, but the mathematics are actually the same behind it, and I was an early part of that. And there's a company called Quanser, and we made autonomous robots and stuff like that. If you go to the RoboHub, you'll see some of that stuff. In terms of my academic work, engineering education, technology entrepreneurship, and engineering computing, that's kind of my thing. So that's me, and that kind of gives me that background, that blended background that allows me to talk a little bit more about technology, but also the money side of it, and that's the topic of today, money and value. And we are going to start with this, my favorite chocolate bar, O. Henry's. Do they have O. Henry's? No, okay. Do they have O. Henry's in Mexico? The US, some parts do, okay? Canada definitely, and I have some for you. Okay, I'll let you open this and take as much as you want. Even the student co-ops can have some. Does anybody have nut allergies? Okay, because if you do, I have Mars bars here too. All right, you can share however you want to split it. And here's the question. How much is this worth? And what would you say? Sure, $250, whatever. Now, your mind didn't go to anything but the price you would pay, right? Because why would you? Why would I be counting how many nuts there are, or you're really struggling with that, aren't you? To the point of embarrassment. All right. But normally that's what we think of. What would we pay? Now, take a look. Consider two different groups of people. So, this is meant to be people like yourselves, sort of young hipsters, and this is people like me. Okay. So, those of you who live in Canada, you know Kim's Convenience. That's a popular sitcom, and it's about a man who looks just like me, who runs a convenience store, and you people are that. If you are Mr. Kim, you might have a different answer on how much is this worth. You might actually say, well, I'd go to the wholesalers where you buy things that you want to sell, and it might only cost me $1.25, but I sell it to these fine people for $2. Okay, that's what businesses do. They buy at a lower price and they sell at a higher price. And obviously you can do the arithmetic. The revenue portion then is the amount that we sold for, and the profit is 75 cents. Not too difficult to get your head around. And this word called margin is the word that we use for that difference expressed as a percentage. So 75 cents out of $2, which is the profit margin out of the selling price, is 37.5%. So we can say, I have a margin of 37.5%. You may have heard the phrase when you're talking to people, their businesses have very slim margins. That means they really can't charge too much more than what they pay for. So in fact, regular groceries and things like that, that's why they have to have so much stock, so that the little profit slim margins can add up. But software companies, where basically you're not producing anything, you're putting out crappy code for people to crash their computers on, and you charge exorbitant amounts every month for that, your margin is ridiculously high. And margins are kind of important. Now, if I were Mr. Kim, in fact, Mr. Kim is probably a lot like my dad. He actually was an economist, but he ended up owning a variety store or a convenience store instead. He had a very intuitive sense on how much to pay for certain things and how much to charge. And most good shopkeepers have that sense. But from your point of view, you're not going to go to London and say, hey, you know, we're doing this amazing solution, and when they ask questions about financial elements, you're not going to do an intuitive treatment of that, or you shouldn't. If you have the time, you should give a more structured answer, and that's what this first part is really about. So here's a step one of a structured answer to Mr. Kim, at least. So far we have not looked at all at your challenges, but there it is. Oh, Henry, if I go to the wholesalers, and if I'm Mr. Kim, I'm going to pay $1.25. My retail price is $2. Let's say in 1 week I expect to sell 100 of these things. You can do the arithmetic. Total revenue is $200 on a total expense of $125. My profit is $75. Then, if I'm really organized, I can go through everything that I sell and I can make this chart. And you get this nice number, $273. And I put it in green. If anybody struggles with color a little bit, I apologize, but green from now on will mean it is a good thing. Red means it's a bad thing. So this means I am taking in more money than I am spending. That's a good thing. But this is nowhere near complete. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to think about, well, yeah, even this picture, he has 18 more things than what this chart says, and you could probably think about other things that he has to take into account. So let's do that. Electricity, okay, you have to have power. Insurance, these are the kind of things that younger people, unless you own a car, you're probably not thinking of that, but if you're a business, you need stuff like that. Sometimes it's the law. Rent, if you do not own the facilities, you're paying somebody some high amount of money, and if you have anybody other than your poor family to work at the store, you are paying somebody, at least in this province, you're paying somebody at least $15 an hour. So this is a weekly thing, and I use some guesses or estimates, and it doesn't really matter. But as soon as you do that, your number goes to hell, right? Now you're down 447. If I were Mr. Kim, I'd get really nervous, but it gets even worse. All right. So there's the weekly sales and profits, and this is the maintenance expenses. What are those? Well, that is what it costs, at least just a brief treatment of what it costs to open a store. Stores don't just pop out of nowhere. Once you get the room or the facilities, you'll need to put up a new sign. You need to clean up. Maybe change the lighting, things like that. You need shelves, stock. You need to go out and buy. You don't want to buy one thing at a time. You need to go and pay a bunch of money for a whole bunch of different things at the beginning. So there's a subtotal, $11,000 for this trivial example. Now what's this weekly payment thing? So you would know because you took economics. And one of the things that you do there is you figure out how you take a big hunk of money and you carve it up into little regular payments, right? And using interest rates, you can get to different values. So when you guys take it, it will be one of the most horrific courses you've ever taken, not because it's difficult, because it's so bloody boring. And you wonder, we have computers, and we do this online. Why do we have to do this? Anyways, what I said here was, well, let's just say, you're going to borrow this money up front. You don't have $11,000. You're going to go to a bank, going to say, please, I want to build this great new business. Lend me $11,000. And I just made a simplistic calculation. Over 5 years, I pay a little bit every week. I didn't assume any interest, zero interest. What is the weekly payment? It's $42. That is a weekly expense that just goes into this whole mess. So that makes that number worse. Even at a weekly level, whatever was part of your original situation still hits you every single week. And this is why this man is so nervous, because he is only able to sell this amount, but he has all of these expenses. And really, that's why it's so important. Right now, I mean, so at least most of you do not have unlimited amounts of money at your disposal. I'm presuming that. Dr. Betty does. He lives very modestly, but he's always in India at any given time. And anyways, most people have to actually make this work. They have to make their green. They have to spend less than what they pull in. If you're not a store owner, you have to deal with it with your salary. You have to make more money than you're going to spend. Otherwise, you're going to increase your debt, and eventually the debt may harm you because it's too big, or somebody gets really angry at you and punishes you. There's a bunch of things, bad things that happen if you can't make this work. And that exact same answer applies if you are a municipal government. So you go in there and you say, I think every house should be made of titanium and fueled with its own private nuclear generator, and they'll ask, okay, how are you going to pay for this? And unless you have a good answer for that, and it's out of the question that every house wins the lottery, it's probably not going to be a believable solution. So really, what it comes down to is if you have a good command of your finances, you're going to be more credible. It's as simple as that. If you go to a bank and you just start blurting out everything about your wonderful ideas, and you forget to shower, and you show up late, and you have no sense of orderly calculations on how much you're going to make or borrow, any of that, they're not going to lend you money. And it's no different if you're going to do a proposal to a municipal group. If you go in there, it could be the greatest set of ideas in the world. If you can't present the case in a structured way that typically goes back to dollars and cents, you're not going to be credible. So we're going to move very soon to how do you go from chocolate bars to a housing development, okay? So that's where this part of the lecture is heading. Before we do that, talk a little bit about, go back to value. So at least when McMaster teaches this course, and I don't know if Khalifa did this, but we focus on one basic equation. Net value is equal to benefit minus cost. So we don't tend to focus on those horrible summation equations. This is what we dwell on. Net value is benefit minus cost. And for this chocolate bar that sells for $2 and the wholesale price is $1.25, and if all I'm thinking about, I'm Mr. Kim and I am losing sleep over the value of this chocolate bar, then the net value to me is 75 cents. That is the definition of the net value function, and we can do an awful lot with this. And so this presentation today is really on circling around this equation in different ways that eventually gets you hopefully a little closer to what you need to do for your challenge project. Okay, so if it was purely an issue of the chocolate bar, then this is trivial. It's actually not even worth doing. But of course, Mr. Kim is not going to think about that chocolate bar all the time. This is really the issue, that big fat issue that he's worried about. It's his entire business. And fundamentally, the net value equation has to eventually translate to net value for Mr. Kim is, on the positive side, all sources of money into the store combined over the span of his business has to be greater than all expenses from the very beginning combined. Okay. So you can have a bad week, you can have a bad month, and you can survive it as long as more often than not you have a better week. You've probably seen stores when you go shopping where there's the shopkeeper, nobody else is there. And that store's been there for 10 years. And you wonder, how the hell do they make money? How do they survive? Do they have a secondary business behind the scenes? Are they working for the government or something? And it's a spy office or something like that? No, but this is, in the end, this is the essential equation, and you kind of have to figure out how this applies to your project. Now, one of the difficulties, any questions so far? This is really easy stuff. It's all trivial arithmetic. All right. This is when it doesn't get hard, it just gets weird at this point, all right? What is this value this thing to you? And you've our friend from Campbellford, because there's a Campbellville this side of Toronto, right? You said 250, and then your head immediately went to the price. That's fine, but are there other ways? Because ultimately, this is not an easy thing to do, as we will very soon see. What is the net value, or any value, other than the price? Okay? Can you think of something other than the price? Calories. Excellent. Anything else?
Enjoyment, like happiness.
Happiness. Yes.
Like craving, satisfaction.
Excellent. Okay. Good stuff like that, right? In fact, here. Calories. That's number one. You could quantify it through calories. Net value expressed through calories. And you can compare it to an apple, which is lower calories, but possibly more density in nutrients in different ways. If you are giving it as a gift, as I just did to you, I'm literally bribing you so that you will pay attention, right? And hopefully I'll get some goodwill. Security, if I'm going to save all of this in case there's a power out, I have no money, I'm trapped in my car in the winter, I have a couple of chocolate. All of that may have real value, but the question is, if I'm just ignoring that, I can't stay, these are all weird units, and there's no way you can compare apples to apples, so to speak. Is there any other type of monetary value for any of these more subjective things? In the end, that is the big issue that you will face as you develop a financial model for your project. Because on the benefit side, it takes a lot of effort to figure out how do I quantify it, and then how do I express that quantity in dollars. So we're going to go through some similar examples. 26 minutes, we're going to get through this. All right, any questions?
Tom, I'm sorry I'm a little late coming here. I just wanted to introduce you. So kind of after my hour, I'm introducing. Tom is very dear to me. He's one of us. He went to Waterloo. Did his undergraduate, his master's, with his PhD, and his heart has always been here. He might roam around in different places. He has roamed around in various places. I don't know of anybody who's more traveled than Tom is. He has been to virtually every school, and in the world, I think, but that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that definitely is. And he understands engineering, and he has a keen mind of analysis. He can basically fly over a thing and return me the essence of the thing. So when we discussed this, I knew I was talking to the right person, because his heart is in sustainability. He rides a scooter, red color, right?
Actually, I sold it to buy a bicycle.
-5, right?
Yes.
But
I bought a bicycle and a canoe. Yeah. In fact, we will cover that topic as we go to part 2.
Wonderful, but I think people talk about sustainability, he practices it. So Thank you, Tom, in advance for all what you have done. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have to run away.
Okay, so we're going to leave chocolate bars for a bit and get something much closer to what you're working on. And this is something that I'm drawing from my second year course on integrated interdisciplinary design. And I think some of you have seen me play this. Just watch this video.
Having strong, sturdy walls, having a door that we can close at night, it's something that we take for granted, being able to lock our door and be safe. For many of these families, for years, sometimes even a lifetime, they don't have that opportunity to have a safe shelter. So when they move into a new story community, when they move into a safe home, families' lives are transformed.
Our first product is a 3D printer that can print a house in 24 hours for half the cost. Phase 1 for New Story and for Icon is a proof of concept house, and the good news is we've done it. We printed the first home in the United States that's going to be permitted. And for us, this is just the beginning. The real kind of home run for us is to be able to do what we've done here in Austin, Texas, in the developing world. And we're doing that in what we call Phase 2, which is in El Salvador. We are going to be printing an entire village for people who live on that homes.
Okay. So for how many of you is this the first time of thinking about 3D printing for houses? So a few of you have heard about this, a couple of you haven't. So in our second year course, we get the students to figure out how they could configure an entire neighborhood of these things in Canada, where we have severe weather issues, and bring in the different things that real-life engineering teams have to deal with in terms of the governments and the communities and the neighborhoods, including consumers and all of this type of stuff. And it was, and what you're going to get is a miniature version of that. But let me start by asking you, why is this such a great idea? Anybody?
It lowers the cost of
Yeah.
building.
Yeah, and there was a number there, right? 4,000, presumably American dollars, so 5,000 Canadian dollars. Anything else?
It can make like a manufacturing line of building houses.
Right. So it's an example of something called additive manufacturing. which is putting stuff in minimal amounts so that you don't waste anything in building things up instead of removing things and throwing it away. I don't know how many of you thought about sustainability in house design, but there is a basic benefit to having concrete walls in terms of its thermal characteristics. It stays cooler in the summer, it stays warmer in the winter. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And the time, obviously, 24 hours. A typical house in Canada, even a small one, probably to get to the basic structure, you're talking about at least a month. People driving trucks around and banging stuff together. And of course, it uses a lot of wood and a lot of plastics and yada, yada, yada. Whereas this, the basic structure can be done in one day. A lot of good things. What can you tell me about what might not be good?
The use of concrete overall, that concrete is not that sustainable.
That's one point. Although they now have lower carbon concrete as well. Anything else?
Potentially like coming in as a nonprofit to these countries where it can be very helpful in all jobs.
Yeah, that absolutely. There would be construction labor organizations in this country that would freak out over something like this if it actually caught on. The sheer number of people it takes to actually build a house here is substantial.
I would think as well that not every country would have access to that technology as it would be expensive to develop
Yeah.
and to transport.
Yeah. There's a lot of examples. So this next question is the critical one for today, which is, do you think if I gave you enough time, and I'm not going to do that today because we don't have the time, but could you come up with a clear sense of how much it would cost in money, dollars or whatever you want, and then what the benefits would be in money, so that at the end of it you can say we are net positive on the money? So what would you have to do? Probably, I would guess you would do better on the expense side. You can think of how much it costs to hire people, how much materials cost, right? How would you deal with the other side?
And you could just say how much will it sell for, and even if it's not incrementally sold.
Yeah. But even with that, you have to deal with the of, are you Mr. Kim, or are you the government who takes some cut of this, or are you the person who's buying? There's a bunch of things that just make it complicated. You're on the right track because these things do have a value on the market. But if you're subsidizing it for people, then it gets a little complicated as well. Yeah.
It can be hard to like any accuracy like assign a value to like benefits of like the human experience of it, or like how it's improving people's lives.
Yeah, the security of all of these things. As you guys have been developing your solutions, have you actually done anything with the money side of things yet?
No, I mean, we did ask like if we needed to look out into the money or into the community to access services and that side. For what we've been told is that we need to focus more on the proposal rather than the expense side.
Yeah, so you weren't here for my initial comments. That may be true, but you will never, ever be criticized if you make some attempt at capturing the financial elements. So really that's what today is about. So really then, this is the timing is good for this session. I'm trying to get you to now start thinking about this. Shave a little bit off of your project time so that you can argue with each other on how much something costs or what the financial benefit might be. So we started dealing with this. So part of whatever it is you are going to try to propose, and in this case I'm using the 3D printing, it's not hard to imagine, all right, I'm going to have to figure out how much concrete costs, I'm going to have to figure out how much non-printed elements cost, the land. There's a bunch of things that start coming into this, and in the end, the whole idea is to make this credible. And making it credible, I want you to think back to what we did with Mr. Kim, where we went from a very intuitive sense of how much does a chocolate bar cost and what its benefit to creating tables. And it's as simple as that. If you can create some basic tables that show that you put some thought into it and the tables are well organized, and I'm going to give you an example, it at least gets you somewhere. So really today is about getting somewhere. Now, in terms of the course that I taught, the second year course, in essence, we took the word credible and dissected it a little bit more. And in fact, the course was about taking the students through 5 different levels of credibility. Functional, that's probably what you guys are really working on right now. Is it going to work? Are people going to be happy when they actually go into this? All of that good stuff. Environmental, you're probably doing that. Is this truly green, or is the amount of concrete we're going to use really that nasty? And how expensive is low carbon concrete? All of that kind of stuff. These are the things that you might not think of. Regulatory is a big one. Even with that, if you stand up in front of London Council and say, we have actually checked your regulatory, the core regulations for neighborhoods and things like that. So you can't do certain things. And in the end, no, you're not expected to read through all of their laws or anything like that, but just getting some sense. Even stating to them, and now, if we were to do this for real, we will do a regulatory assessment of what this thing is, and understanding what groupings of regulations might be kicking in. So environmental regulations, that could be federal in this country, or provincial, or municipal. Roads and things like that are absolutely municipal. Unless it's a highway, then it's provincial. Airports are federal. There's all sorts of things that kick in, and you have to have some sense. Social cultural is one that is kind of like, human-centered design ideas, where you're really trying to take the people into account, but it's more of, people are subjective and quite often irrational. And one of the things that nobody mentioned about 3D printed houses are people freaking out because there's these weird looking houses popping up, although some of them now look fairly normal. But if you get some of the more abstract looking ones, people like my wife's parents, they would go nuts. And they would start calling their politicians, and then all hell will break loose. So these are the kind of things, and the last one is financial. So really, as you are thinking about your presentation, I'm pretty sure you're going to have a fair bit of detail here, and it's going to be well organized and thought out. You have to make some decision on whether, so you can take the cheap way out and say, that's next phase, or something like that, or they told us we didn't have to deal with that, or you can try to do something with that and having some understanding that that's important. But how do you do at least this part, the red one, financial, which, going back to today, the core of today, that's what today is about. Well, let's go back to Mr. Kim. So in the end, it's really no different than me setting up a chart for the convenience store. Okay, remember we had one-time upfront costs, some regularly spaced expenses, and I said for this one it's weekly, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be monthly, maybe annual for a big project, and that's a reasonable frequency. And on the weekly or the regular reoccurring side, you have expenses and that's all the red in expenses in that one particular column, and green is revenue in this case. Once again, if you are Mr. Kim, it's relatively easy to deal with this chart because revenue is pretty well defined, and it is sales are the dominating issue for a store. But it's much more complicated if you're dealing with a neighborhood or a development, something of a much more complex nature than just selling stuff and getting replenishing the stock. Okay. One of the things that our friend from Khalifa learned, you did the diagrams with the arrows pointing everywhere? No? Really? So if you have a project, and let's say this is 0 to 10 years, and you say first year I'm going to spend a bunch of money, second year we're going to get a little bit of money back, and then somebody's going to give us money here, and then you draw these arrows.
It was more like, I guess it's for the, it was more like land.
Yeah.
When land construction.
Okay.
I had a class where we like, it was not like economic class, but we learned something about project managing.
Okay.
And we used like that chart.
Yeah, these are called cash flow diagrams. All right, cash flow diagrams basically take numbers and make them into up or down arrows. Up means money is coming in, that's good. Down is money is going out, that's not good. And the length of these arrows are basically one-dimensional vectors, and the length is the amount that's going up or down. The good thing about this is if I were to draw this to you, 0, everybody here would be able to tell me, is this good news or bad news, right? And if all of a sudden I drew something like this, you know, wah, wah, like in the cartoons, and that's why we draw these diagrams. So let's have a look at Mr. Kim's situation in terms of a cash flow diagram, because it helps us summarize his investment. So he's going to spend a big hunk of money at the beginning, get a new sign, get some shelves, clean up everything, do a little bit of marketing to announce his opening, and then a little bit more. And one of the nice things about these cash flow diagrams is you can stack them. If you can say, you know, at the end of the second year, I'm going to have 2 major expenses, you don't have to do the arithmetic and draw one. You can just keep putting these arrows, and that gives you a better sense of how complicated that time is for the expenses, and this is the way we might do a regular occurring expense. Okay? And similarly, you can do that with revenue. And so when we're opening up the store, we may not have a lot of green coming in, but over time, the whole idea is that green starts growing, and if you're a real business, it kind of goes up and down and up and down, and until, if you're successful, these things get progressively bigger and you have the red under control. So this is why people my age argue constantly about balancing budgets and things like that. Because in the end, if there's too much red going down versus green going up, you're screwed. You just will not survive, because, like it or not, this world runs on money. So financial benefits are green, financial costs are red. And to be credible, everything has to at least balance out or be more positive in the end. Once again, we go to this notion of how do we go from the chocolate bar to this thing. Okay, and you know, I think I made the assumption we're going to build 100 of these homes. You know, how would I calculate something like that? And really, this I think we're getting pretty close to the end of this first section. This is all I'm going to give you for the answer, which is initial investments, construction, neighborhood maintenance. I put some examples there. Design, environmental assessment, land acquisition, public consultation, construction permits, materials, equipment rental, transportation, power, security, labor, etc., etc. Neighborhood maintenance, etc., etc. I'm not even going to give you clues, and I put year 1, 2, whatever. Year N, probably 5 is too short. Certainly 2 is too short for a project like this. This is really talking about the idea right to it's actually functioning well and it has matured. You're probably looking at maybe 10 years for something like this. So the goal is figure out good things to include on these rows, then figure out what the numbers might be. That will be on the expense side. And in fact, I will bet with the amount of experience that all of you have, this is just a matter of time. You need to find 2 hours, everybody running Google or ChatGPT, and you ask how much this costs, and you try to do your best to fill that in. And then you put a little star in the bottom saying, estimates only, to be refined at a certain future date, or something like that. Sort of cover your behind type little comment on that. But the question is this. So I would actually assume that even if all you did for your project presentation was only do the expense side, that will help improve your credibility, because you're dealing with the downside, you're dealing with the negative side of all of this. But in the end, somebody still has to go through and think about, how do you recover? And it's not good enough to say, well, it's for the good of society and we need to do things like that. May make our hearts feel good, but in the end, somebody will stop the project because the numbers are not adding up. So how do we get this recovered? So let's think about what a project like this might look like. So there might be an initial phase, right? So I made these little diagrams. Here's a drawing, the initial idea, then important looking people with white hats, they do some initial planning and site surveying, that kind of thing. Then you're actually building something, right? And then magically you get into a more positive situation where the houses are built. And then for the most part, families from that point on are going to live there and they're going to enjoy. Okay, and their children are going to grow, they're going to have nice gardens, and let's assume everybody they're good people and they're going to take care of the houses. So everything is wonderful. And along the way though, you're going to have to think about things like garbage collection. If you're in Canada, clearing the snow in the winter is a pretty big freaking deal here. Water treatment, all sorts of things. And in those cases, yes, they might add a few trucks just for the new neighborhood. They're not likely going to build an entire new water treatment plant. And so you have to think about percentages of things and whatever just to get a handle on this. And in the end, what it comes down to is this is a big, huge bunch of downward red arrows at the beginning. Bunch of little arrows roughly spaced out here. You just need the values for that. And the question is, what is this stuff? And questions like, what is typical property tax in Ontario? Those of you who live in Ontario, do you know what your parents pay in property taxes? So if you just have a regular house in Campbellford, actually, because my wife and I are driving, whenever we see a for sale sign, we look it up online and we get the property taxes. You're probably, if you live in a good sized house with a nice yard, probably around $5,000 a year in property taxes. That's all money going into the city. So that's at least one source. If you have 100 homes, now, they're going to be smaller homes, more affordable. It may not be $5,000 in tax. It might be $3,000, $2,000 in tax. Multiply that by 100. Every year, that's at least one source. Is that everything? We will see that it probably is not. But we'll pause there with the exception of this one slide. And I mentioned this. As you build up that chart or that model, you are going to find the costs are typically easy to estimate, and the benefits are trickier because of the subjectivity of everything. All right, so we got that. So this is where we're going to start. What's the best way to spend $4,000? Buy a kick-ass vlogging kit to launch your new channel. You've heard about a great new conference and that in California or someplace fun like that, and you're gonna go and you're gonna network and meet influencers and people like that. Or you're gonna take that money and rent a really, really cool RV type van, and you're gonna drive across the entire continent. In fact, you know, from northern Canada right down to southern Chile. You're gonna do the whole thing. Okay, so who's for one? No one, me. Who's for two? Okay, so let's pause there. Why two?
Because a lot obviously knowledge from
Yeah.
It's something like this will grow my future.
Yeah, and it's good for you in some sense, right? And more than likely, it's also highly enjoyable. You're going to be around smart people, and you're going to have lots of good discussions. Same.
It would be an investment.
Very, very practical, sensible reasons. And who wants to do this? Yes. And why?
Fun.
Yeah.
I want to do stuff. Simple things. Personal growth. I mean, the
Yep.
other ones could be like financial benefit, but like I want to
And
be
so the people that you would meet on that could also be networking.
Well, we know what the expense is, right? So we know it's $4,000 of a big arrow down. What would be the green up, right? So here's some ways of looking at it. I'll become an influencer if I do my job well with this, and I'll make $10,000. So I don't know if I will, but that's at least a number that's a target for me, right? That means I'll need like 1 million subscribers or something, or views or something like that. But there's some way that I can say I am going to be up $6,000 because of this thing. You can also say, if you go to the conference, I'm going to meet all sorts of really important people. I'm going to network, and I'm going to really aim to be hired into a better job than a crappy job that I might have now. So with that, $40,000 more per year, so that's a net increase of 40. That's quantifiable, and that's an increase, and you can talk about that. I'll become enlightened, and I will live out of the van, saving $60,000 a year. So you're going to do this for 10 years in this van. So that's also quantifiable. In fact, savings is another way of having the arrow pointing up, by not having it point down. So these are all ways to quantify into dollars something that was very vague. And in fact, this is what businesses do all the time. So some of you, the Waterloo people, have taken co-op already. I don't know if you've ever been in budget meetings where people argue about how much things cost, but let's say you're gonna have $300,000, $300K, and people are now jockeying to get that money into their department. Production wants to buy a new robot. Sales and marketing wants to do a major campaign with TV ads and all sorts of good stuff. Or HR wants to hire 3 people and spread them out. And this is actually quite typical of the debates that you get. And in all cases, you know what the expense is. It's $300,000. It's hard to then say, what is the actual benefit? So that if I am the CEO and somebody represents each of these 3 possibilities, I'm likely going to say, what is going to make me more money, or what is going to be healthier financially for the company at the end of the day? So even if there are other factors, at some point somebody's going to say, what is going to keep us healthier financially as a company, or else everybody's fired. We might as well fire everybody if we're not going to survive and if we're going to go into bankruptcy. So along the lines of what we just saw, 3 ways. Look, get this robot, you're going to save dollars, speed up the supply chain, make customers happy, they spend more dollars. The dark side, you can get rid of 2 people because you have automation. Like it or not, that is a reality that a lot of companies do. Launch a major marketing blitz to increase sales. Well, that's the easiest one. You pump money into marketing, more people buy. That's automatically a boost up. 3 new staff members, they're pretty expensive, bright young people. But Mo is a great project manager. Amy is an amazing salesperson. Julie is a super manufacturing engineer. All 3 of these skill sets can feed into a positive dollar impact. But this is clearly the easiest one to defend. This is why companies spend so much money on marketing instead of doing good engineering stuff, making better product. They would rather sell the hell out of their products through commercials and ads and bombarding you with information because it works, unfortunately. So you kind of have a sense now on how you might convert a more subjective benefit of something like this. And really the key is, if you are thinking of building an entire community of this type of weird houses, and let's say you're building 100, aside from the tax revenue of each, so aside from 100 times $2,000 per year, whatever that, or whatever the actual tax value is, what could be the benefit in dollars? Any thought? In fact, go back to some of the ones that you said before. How would you go from that thought to $1? Yeah.
You could think of like potentially bringing more people to a different area, so then you could like foster the local economy.
Yeah.
Taxes.
Yeah.
I would think directly on the real estate that houses might cost $4,000 more, or over the time will appreciate.
Yeah.
The people might have, they might have a way to get a mortgage, so they could increase their own revenue and grow a family.
Yeah.
Houses are directly related to economic increase and economic increase, so you have more people in the family, you're going to work more.
Good.
And those people is going to, it's an
Okay.
exponential growth.
All of those answers are really good, and they should feed into whatever you are going to talk about, if you're going to talk about this. So I'm taking an example, housing affordability. So a lot of people consider, at least in this province, us having a housing crisis right now. Since the pandemic, our housing has gone to insane levels. And you guys who are renting here, you must have seen your rents go, like in a blink of an eye, it went from affordable to stupid, right? Housing affordability, well, how is that going to, other than value to you, if you have affordable housing, how does that help in terms of the community? And that's where these kinds of arguments have to come in. So here's some, and this is kind of where you guys are heading anyways. Families with affordable housing have financial stability, period. If you're not worried about having rats and bed bugs or being kicked out of your house, you are just going to do better work in a bunch of places. So financial stability promotes increased productivity at work, you're just a better citizen, and ultimately, if you stay employed and you do a good job at the company you work for in the community, that company stays. And it goes back in the end to that economic impact argument, that stable people with good optimistic prospects tend to feed into the economy. You should be able to find articles and things that give you some answers. Again, this is where you can use ChatGPT because it's a low stakes thing. Like nobody's going to take this for real, right? So if ChatGPT says, hey, typically this involves these types of arguments, and it gives you a nice way of comparing some basic things, that's a good place to start. Don't end with ChatGPT. Start with there and then try to find some numbers and things to tack onto it. That's a reasonably proper and appropriate use of that technology. Here's another one. Good affordable housing promotes stable neighborhoods, and stable neighborhoods attract more businesses. So this is a big one. This is what a lot of governments want to do. They want to attract businesses. It's easier for them to wrap their heads around Okay, if a new clean manufacturing and an assembly plant for new electric vehicles pops up in our neighborhood, you know it's going to hire 2,000 people from your new region, meaning people will move in. You know that company's going to pay massive taxes because they're going to have a gigantic amount of land that they're factoring. You know all of these things. So you should be able to say, hey, when Toyota placed their factory in Cambridge, which is just south of here, what was the economic impact? And it should be in the billions. If you can come up with a quantifiable number like that, you at least are showing you are thinking through this in a very balanced and more comprehensive way. But it's tough. And if you always say, and the economic impact is that it can get monotonous, and we do look for creativity, or there is room for you to deal with these things in different ways for each one. So things like environmental stewardship, community leadership, quality of life, all of these things, eventually they will end up in notions of economic impact, but you just have to figure out what the specifics of that might be, and you will have to do research if you want to actually take this on for your project. Now, having said that, even if you choose not to do this too much for this project, I guarantee you'll hit these concepts when you start working in your career, unless you get your van and you take off for the next 20 years. So that takes us to the end of the boring economic stuff. Any questions? Based on nodding, I don't think this was too much of a disaster. Okay, so let's move on to stuff that I'm more interested in. How do you build a truly green company? So first question to you. Give me an example of a really green company that you respect.
The one that doesn't exist.
Okay.
I like Cotton, the Canadian
Yeah, I don't.
clothing company.
Okay.
They're like B Corp certified. They
Yeah.
do a lot of good work.
What kind of clothes do they make?
They make it's like a kind of slow fashion company, and they make just like everyday basic stuff like
Yeah.
jeans and
Okay.
sweaters and stuff made out of cotton.
Yeah. Sort of like Patagonia, right? So I hope everybody's heard of Patagonia. Patagonia is a very famous company. They're out of Chile, and their founders are legitimately sincere advocate for the environment, to the extent that they have aligned their products and their practices of manufacturing, distribution, all of that, to be more thoughtful than more conventional companies like a Zara or other more trash fashion companies. And they've been really recognized for that progressive view. And in fact, the owners, and I forgot what their names were, when they got to a certain level of extreme wealth, they actually decided to buy out land to conserve and to preserve in Chile. So they took billions of dollars and transferred it, and just to protect. So everything about what that company does is you just can't criticize it. So think about that a bit. Let me go to the second one. Brody Bicycles. Remember when Professor Betty said, and he drives a scooter. Well, that's not complete motorcycles. And I was one of those crazy people. And I used to drive everywhere. And it was really fast. Then I almost died on the expressway, and I decided, maybe I shouldn't do this.
You almost not die in a motorcycle. What are you doing?
Yeah, okay. That's not what I was thinking when I saw the debris coming to me on the expressway. Anyways, I sold my motorcycles and I bought bicycles and canoes. Okay, so I discovered this company called Brody Bicycles. Good quality, had really nice ride. I liked the sort of the retro coloring and look of it. And you can only buy it in real bicycle shops. You can't go to some trashy department store and have an 18-year-old salesperson selling you a bicycle that they know nothing about. You can only buy it from real people. And it's designed and assembled in Canada. Yes, some of the parts come from overseas, but they do make an effort to make these good bicycles and carry a more thoughtful approach. The downside, it's about twice as expensive as your basic regular bicycle. So Canadians here will know the name Canadian Tire. Okay, Canadian Tire is an all-encompassing store chain, big chain that has automotive stuff, it has housewares, it has hardware, all sorts of things that kind of move and sports and all of that. Anyways, if you're just a regular family, you're probably buying your first bicycle for your kids at Canadian Tire. And their equivalent of these bicycles were about half the price. Okay, but for me, you know, I thought half the price or twice the price, I can live with that. It's not like a car at twice the price or a house at twice the price. It's a bicycle, and I really liked it, and I valued all of the positives. So this was when I used to be really fit before I got sick and got injured, and that's our bike. My bike, my wife's bike. I thought it was cool. Okay. Tesla, this one is more controversial. So Brody Bicycles, it's relatively easy for me to say that's a green company because they're selling products that are inherently green and they're making a good effort at doing it the right way. This is a tougher one. So let me ask you, how many people think Tesla is a green company? Everybody's doing this, right? So you are giving credit because it's an EV, but you know it's weird. Elon Musk, when you see what he does, it doesn't occur to you that, oh, he is at the front edge of environmentalism. This is who we need to back. You don't say that. Let me help you organize your thoughts on pretty important question on what is truly a green company, okay? And this is actually a technique that I developed with my course. So I was never an environmental prof. They forced me to teach it because the guy who was normally teaching it left. So I inherited the course. I didn't know anything about this, so I had to teach myself. And I felt the best way of doing that was to actually explore a complicated question with the students. And so what you're getting is where my course went to after 2 years of teaching it, okay? And one of the things that we've developed is this chart. Horizontal axis is the complexity of the design. So complex components, so maybe it has microprocessors, sensors, that kind of thing, or simple components. It's just things that you assemble. Niche market, meaning more exclusive market, fewer people. Mass market, many people. Where does the company serve? Okay, just think about this. So really we have the product axis in the horizontal and the market axis on vertical. Let me just ask, where would Tesla go? Niche. So high up, right? And the other two are kind of, that's trickier. Anyways, I'm not going to belabor the point. This is where I kind of put it. So this is not a scientific thing. I just put it there because that's what my gut said. Yes, Tesla, very complex technology, and really it's for a few exclusive people. The people who annoy you on the roads because they go way too fast through the roundabouts and things. Patagonia, the components are actually quite simple. In fact, they do a pretty comprehensive job of getting the right supplier so that they're not doing weird stuff that burn a lot of fossil fuels and things. So they have simple components. They're not exactly mass market, because the one thing about Patagonia, and I'm assuming cotton, it's expensive. You treasure every single one of those items, but if you are a single mom and you're raising 3 kids, you're not going to be buying this stuff unless you have an amazing job. And Brody Bicycles is kind of the same. I can imagine that a few people would still look at it as a bicycle and they know bicycles break down and they may want to buy a bit higher quality. The technology, it's still fairly old school, but materials and things like that, it's creeping in, so it's heading that way. That's kind of where I would put it. Now let's look at bicycles for a second. And if I were Mr. Kim, and I have my convenience store, and I find the numbers aren't adding up and I'm losing money, what should I do? What are some of the things that I could do?
Decrease costs.
Okay. Decrease costs because people will buy more, right? If you decrease costs. But your margins are slim, right?
Or try to mass market product.
Okay.
Increase sales.
So these are very, very common answers. And in fact, pretty much every young engineer I've ever worked with gives similar answers to similar questions. One of the things about my own career, although I have these degrees and things, I worked pretty much on the business side of all the companies. So I wasn't the one who developed the cryptography algorithms or anything. I was the one who figured out how to present it to people and negotiate partnerships and things like that. So most people, especially technical people, when they come in and we get into a debate about pricing and things, their instinct says, lower the price, people buy more. And I found the exact opposite is true. And in fact, the typical tendency of companies like Brody is they put in more sophisticated technology because that helps them promote. They're saying, we have this feature. They don't. And they keep pushing the technology, which costs a little more. And because it costs more, they need to find people who will pay more for that feature, which tends to push you up into the niche market. In fact, by and large, if you enter this space as a legitimate player with all the best intentions, the realities of the business, because of those things called margins, that difference, that net value between what you're bringing in and what it costs you, that's the thing, that's the brick wall that will not allow you to drop the price anymore. Unless you want to do massive marketing and stuff, but that's more expenses, and so you know all of that stuff now. In fact, the easiest thing to do is make your products more expensive as long as you put new things in it and you seek out wealthier people. It's an ugly reality. Competitive companies tend to increase tech and seek higher value and more exclusive markets, and this is that sustainability paradox. This is the term I use in my course. Is sustainability only for the wealthy? And in fact, if you look at everything, so Brody Bicycles, when I first bought it, 2018, was the factor was it was twice the Canadian Tire bicycle of the equivalent. Today it's 3 times. So Canadian Tire is a mass market. They have figured out how to work with supply chains and volumes and slim margins. But if you're a tiny little company trying your best to do a good business, chances are you're going to be pushed to go up. Electric vehicles. So we all know what Tesla does, that they're meant for really, really wealthy people. There was a very popular electric vehicle called the Chevy Bolt. And they recently announced that they're discontinuing it. Why? Because nobody wants to make cheap EVs, because people who need cheap EVs can't actually afford an EV, period. So all of the money for EV are in the hands of very wealthy people. So what do very wealthy people want? They want faster cars, they want leather seats, they want better sound systems, yada, yada, yada. The Chevy Bolt doesn't fit any of that. So this is the last year for the Chevy Bolt. After this, there's only a couple of affordable ones left. EVs are pushing their way towards being very exclusive things. In time, it will shift. But right now, this is the first generation, and this is what first generation companies typically tend to do. So going back to this. So we now need to think a little bit more about how do we break through this paradox? How do we actually not get pulled in? And this is not a criticism about the companies that end up there, because they had the best intentions. It's just the natural business forces tend to push them in this direction. So, another pivot. This is really probably what Dr. Betty meant by my interest in sustainability. So we have a cottage. So in Canada, a lot of people have this second, more rustic place. We escape the cities and we go there. This is ours, and it's on a place called the Bruce Peninsula, which is about 200 kilometers north of here. Takes a couple of hours. Solar electricity. We also, so photovoltaics, that's the electricity part. We also, this is the solar water heater, so we heat water using the sun. Passive temperature moderation. These walls are concrete, so it actually helps keep things cool in the summer, warm in the winter. And all of these windows are south facing, so that brings the sun, which in combination with the materials has that moderating effect. We also don't take water out of the ground. We catch rain, and we filter, and we store it in a gigantic swimming pool-like thing inside the house. And all these woods. So we're not on a lake. Many people in Canada have cottages on the lake. Ours is in the woods, and we have a large wood property. And I cut down trees, and I chop them up. And in the winter, we can use this year-round. We cook with a wood-burning stove, and no live trees are taken down. We only take down the trees that need to be taken down. And if we were actually really clever and had a little bit more time, we would grow our own food. This is the one that still is vexing us. We can't find the time or enough water to grow sufficient food. So now we're exploring that. So this is a passion for us. Why am I doing this? Well, first of all, if I just told you, and I have videos and all this other stuff on this property, if you take my course, a good quarter of the course is based on the commercial dimensions and something like that. But the question is, these are good ideas. Each part of it is not the most expensive thing. They're easy to understand. The technology is actually quite solid. Why wouldn't everybody do this? And in fact, if I were Mr. Kim and I said, you know, it might be a good idea for us to, because he heard environmentalism is a good thing, and so he decided that he wants to do solar and do all of this stuff and rebrand himself as Kim's New Green Convenience. And why is this such a bad idea? Yeah.
Like space. There's so much space. Like not everyone has a huge wood lot.
Yeah.
Can take all their.
So that's just at a functional level. But even if solar power is coming down in price, even with that, when you have a small margin, whatever notoriety you would get for becoming green as a convenience store is probably not going to generate enough new business to overcome the cost of these things. So really, that's fundamentally it. The next graphic is the most important one that, in fact, I start pretty much every one of my courses that deals with sustainability with this graph. It's going to seem obvious initially, but it won't be. Okay, you know this graph, right? Everybody should know this graph. What is your interpretation of this graph right now? What is your first gut reaction to this? Very familiar. Bad, scary. We got to do something. We got to bring this thing down, right? That's what we're doing. Okay. This is the next picture. Really is why the answer to the question, why does this graph exist? How did we get there? Because of this question. Who gets to eat tonight? Think about it. When you're at the year 0, so Romans were still doing stuff, and the Chinese and the other side of the world were building all those terracotta warriors and things, and the Great Wall. Back then, the only people who ate regular good food were people who were really rich. Not even Tesla owners. We're talking about electric Maseratis and Ferraris. And like the thinnest layer of society actually got to eat good food on a regular basis. But today, even in relatively modest countries, the answer to that question is very different. And how did we get there? It's through, we rode this curve. Because it was the Industrial Revolution, it was the structuring of the capitalist economies and market-driven forces that allowed us to bring the cost and stabilize food production, yada, 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 yada. And in the end, we could not get here without doing this. Maybe we could have, we didn't. This is how we did it. And it wasn't because a bunch of old fat men were sitting around saying, how do we screw the planet? No, their thought was, how do we make more food and get it to hungry people quicker? And they built factories and railroads and did all sorts of interesting stuff to allow this to happen. The reason why this is important is I don't think it's as simple as us trying to reverse this curve. It has, mainly because that curve is so tied in with basic living, right, we have. And in fact, that's the purpose of this graph, right? Everybody's on top. In fact, in my course, we do a much more significant survey, and I can show that all of these companies just plop themselves somewhere on the top, and they're all moving to the top and left. Really, the question has to be, how do you get Walmart, which is down here? How do you get Canadian Tire, which is down? How do you get them to stay down there, but go green? That's the question. The more Patagonias you have does not solve the planet's problems. You need to figure out how Walmart gets its products from closer sources, use different materials, have better labor practices, all of this stuff. And I have a good friend. She was a professor here. She's now working for a startup on blending AI with basic environmental strategies in companies. One of the things that she's finding is some of the best work is being done by Walmart.
Some of the best what, sorry?
Best work in terms of promoting sustainability. It's because it's in their best interest not to have trucks driving across the country to bring a pineapple from Mexico into Canada, that if somehow they can figure out how to promote a different fruit, get it closer, or get them to use a more modest form, whatever it is. Like Walmart is the company that tries to shave every last penny out of its cost, but sometimes more sound environmentally friendly policies can do things like that. But certainly, it is true that if you do have if Walmart figures out something interesting to do and it works, their impact is immediate and it's far-reaching, and it happens down here. So the question is, how do you stay below this line? How do you not go above? And to me, that is ultimately the challenge. So I'm not going to show these videos. Here's some examples. You know this now, 3D printed houses. If you actually drill deep into that technology, even the concrete issue, there's a bunch of things that you can do to theorize, at least imagine that this could keep you under the line. And one of the things is zero emission concrete. And various companies, including one that is within this area, Carbon Cure, has figured out a way. Concrete is carbon intensive because of the curing, the treatment of it to turn basically dirt into concrete. And there are different ways that we can do that from a materials perspective, and one of the better companies, and this is not just purely experimental, they're actually building buildings and it doesn't cost that much more, but it still costs something. So hopefully over time that spreads. Similar type of company out of Holland called Dyco, and they do a no water dyeing for fabrics. And the actual whatever chemicals that they have are much friendlier. Again, we don't know if they're going to make it. We hope that they do, because if they do make it, then the impact that they have on fabric manufacturing and a whole bunch of things basically shifts the balance. If they make it and they're profitable, then all of a sudden, once again, they're one of the biggest, potentially biggest mass market impacts. So this one I am going to show you a video.
Let's turn trash into cash. My name is Suzanne Mate. I'm the founder of JK Bakers Limited, and we convert plastic waste into building products. Plastic waste is not just a Kenya problem, but it's a worldwide problem. And here in Nairobi, we generate about 500 metric tons of plastic waste every single day, and only a fraction of that is recycled. We decided what more can we do instead of just sitting in the sidelines and complaining. Essentially, companies have to pay to dispose the waste, so we solve their problem. The waste essentially comes for free. This is the plastic waste we get from factories. With this, we mix with sand as the plastic is like the binder. We have 3 machines. The extruder does the mixing of plastic waste with sand at very high temperatures, and then the press compresses it. Plastic is fibrous in nature, and so therefore the brick ends up having a stronger compression strength. The value like waste, it's almost half the weight, so therefore during transportation and installation it's faster in terms of cost implication. We right now have a capacity of producing 1,000 to 1,500 bricks a day. So far we have recycled 20 metric tons, and we are looking to push that value to 50 by the end of next financial year. Winning the Young Champions of the Earth Award is a huge motivation booster for us as a team. It's been a long 3-year journey, and so this was like someone saying, I see what you're doing and I appreciate that. And with this platform, we're looking to see how we can get on board partners to scale this solution, not just in Kenya, but all over Africa, just to start. And in addition to that, be able to impact and motivate other people and other youths to do similar things in different places. So right now we are just making paving blocks, but we now want to make actual building blocks. As I like saying, you have to be true to your why. Why are you doing this? What is the motivation behind it? For me, I was just tired of being with the sidelines of seeing plastic. I nearly jumped in off a cliff without even a parachute. I was building it out as I was falling down. But isn't that how great things are done? So act for nature.
All right. So I suspect you can see why I like that case study so much. And in fact, if we take all of those and put them on our graph, they kind of end up down here. So you have the 2 much more research-intensive applications, so they have more complex stuff, but very much building materials and clothing fabrics are fundamentally mass market oriented things. Housing and conversion of plastic waste into simple building materials, once again, it's squarely down here. And there's, especially with the Jenga maker's case with the bricks, just hearing that person's rationale on what was the motivation, what is positive in terms of the additional spin-offs of not just having a good business, but employing local people, many things that you could probably quantify to convert that. So it's one of those heartwarming case studies. At this point, I could pause and I could pack up, leave the chocolates here and go. I have one final, I have a bonus topic if you want me to continue.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The greenest company that I can think of, or that I have encountered through development of my courses. So we put aside Patagonia and Teslas and those kinds of fancy companies. We now went through more obscure but higher scientific research type or more fundamental material companies. Any that you can think of? Now you've now seen what drives my head and what kind of things can you make a guess what I think might be the greenest company?
Company that have like net sustainable living.
No. No, this will surprise you. And this may actually have a regional dimension, so I'd be curious to know what the people from Mexico and the UAE might think of this.
You know, actual company, but like nature.
Yeah, no. No. All right. Okay, so it's not, yeah, no, it's not. And in fact, it's the antithesis of Walmart. But some people might associate the two together. All right, I'll give you a clue. Something is, okay. Yeah, that's me. This is so that's my daughter when she was 14, I think. So she's the one who came out of mechatronics 2 years ago. Courage My Love is a store that I used to go to when I was basically your age. And back then, very few of us actually went to vintage clothing stores, and we used to buy all black clothes, and we used to have weird hair and dance to weird music and stuff. Anyways, and I took her there. She wasn't impressed. But 10 years later, look what's happened. So I know in Canada and the US, thrift store are a big thing, not just because you're cheap, but you think you can get interesting things. UAE? No. Mexico? No. Just there's something about it that is not culturally appealing.
I think we have our alternatives. We have mass market and counterfeiting.
Yeah, that's a very different thing. Why? Okay, people who, do any of you actually go to the value villages, and why do you go?
In theory, cheaper.
Yeah.
Sometimes questionable though.
Trying to find like really like expensive designer brands.
Yeah. So, and I would assume you're not embarrassed to tell your friends that you're going to Value Village or you're going thrifting. So it's no longer this hidden secret to save money. And in fact, my candidate for the greenest company is Value Village for a bunch of different reasons. So first of all, this is their story. This is the guy who founded it. And today, their revenue, they actually started off in '54. The revenue is $1 billion. And if you've never been to Value Village, it's like a supermarket of used stuff, but they take some care in organizing the clothing, and they have some standards, I guess. 300 plus stores, mainly in North America, but they're starting to spread. There have been controversies because a lot of people are thinking that they're dishonest because they're pretending they look like charities, but they're not. They're for-profit companies. For me, that's actually the exact reason why they're such, for this particular topic, it makes them a great company, because somehow they have they have defined a way that people think it's great. And they go and they spend money and they create commerce benefits, but at the end of it, it's still used stuff. The fact that they're able to make people believe a bigger story is actually a positive from a business point of view. It may not be from some moral dimension, but from the point of view of, are they doing generally better stuff? The fact that if I had a whole bunch of my Aunt Dolly's clothing and I brought it and gave it for free and they sold it for $100 each, and I didn't know that they were not a charity, is anything hurting society at that point? It's probably not as much as other lies that companies offer. And in fact, that whole there's another company called Got Junk. These people are even more brilliant. So they're about half the size. You pay to have these people come and they take your stuff away and then they upcycle it and sell it to the value villages and stuff. That's even more brilliant. And they have these amazing TV commercials with this guy showing up in a shiny truck promising all sorts of cool things. And all you have to do is pay to have them take your stuff away. Okay? Couple more. eBay. I don't know if eBay is a little ancient for you, but for me, 10 years ago, it was brilliant. Now it's more Kijiji, Facebook Market, and places like that, where you can buy good stuff really cheap based on this. So I kind of summarize it. Yeah, Value Village, it's for profit. Got Junk, for profit. The online people, Kijiji, Facebook Marketplace, eBay, for profit. There's a place in Canada called Restore, probably in the US as well, Restore Habitat. That's a not-for-profit. They take old furniture and building materials that you're not using, and then they transfer them to needy causes where they can build new houses and stuff and furnish. And there's always been things like antique shops, like smaller organizations, charitable thrift, like Goodwill, Salvation Army. These are true charities, churches, and small-scale thrift, like Courage My Love, the little store. That's always existed. What is the thing that pulls them all together that is worthy of me spending time talking about it is this. They are dealing with probably the biggest cause of our planet crisis right now. Remember that chart? Okay. A lot of that we probably could never get away from because it deals with feeding people. But there's a big part of that is driven by this, hyperconsumption. We buy an awful lot of stuff that we absolutely don't need. How many of these markers do you think will get thrown out? Like, most of them, because we don't know which ones are, and at some point the custodian will come in and throw a bunch of them out. Everything we do is based on the notion that, yeah, it's probably not worth our time to dispose of this in the right way, and if we do that, we have to buy more, and it's that cycle. I remember I was at a conference, and a representative of Zara popped up, and she was bragging about how they've managed to reduce the fashion cycle time to 2 weeks. That's insane that a company exists and it's proud of that fact, that they have figured out a way to convince people to change their clothes every 2 weeks and throw the old stuff out. That's the extreme. And in fact, if you really think about what we do individually, hyperconsumption is so much at the root of the issue. I personally believe we can have a very healthy society and have good commerce, but we don't need to actually try to convince people that they need to keep buying things that they don't need and throwing the old stuff away. And in fact, if you think about all of those companies, the modern repurposing or upcycling ecosystem kind of sits here. They're lower tech, and they're clearly mass market. And a company like a Value Village or Got Junk can get themselves up to a fairly large level of employment and keep things out of our landfills and keep products from being over-manufactured. That is a shift that is at the mass market level. So, one final slide before we conclude for today. So this is interesting, and one of the things that differentiates the way I view things and what you might get in an environmental course, or a business course for that matter, because they teach this stuff as well, is we are all in engineering programs, and there is one particular category, this one, where this is the stuff where we can possibly make the greatest contribution because of what we study. If you think about it, we're really the only ones who can do this. lot of people can do stuff up here because you can buy more expensive components, put together and do fancy marketing, and you get the job done up here. This is really more of a pure process and, again, a marketing activity. Nobody else can do this. Pure scientists can't do this because they don't have that practical intent. We actually learn courses that deal with this stuff, and if we can lay on top of that more thinking about commerce and industry and things that make money move around, and if we can have some sense of how various other more complicated human dimensions fit in, we have a shot at making a bigger change. And really that's kind of what, at least my perception of the program that you're in right now, they want you to apply the engineering thinking that blends science and computing and system level thinking and all of that kind of good stuff into a sophisticated solution that other people simply don't have the background to perceive. You're in a pretty privileged situation. All the schools you come from are really, in your regions, really very, very strong, influential entities. And you guys have a pretty good background to dwell in this space. Not saying everybody should go and start designing fancy concrete. If that's not your thing, then that's not your thing. That's cool. But just be aware of what you did learn, because it's so hard to see the connection between your thermodynamics class and something practical and useful. So with that, that's it.